Hello, welcome. Guillaume's given me the wave, so that means we're off. Yeah, that means we're off. Welcome to those of you who are here already, and we'll just give a few moments for a few more people to arrive. My name's Kshanti Kara, and I'm coming to you from the basement shrine room, the breathing space shrine room at the London Buddhist Centre. Guillaume, who's one of the tech persons, is looking kind of confused, so you may or may not be able to hear me. But either way, you get to look at me and the Buddha behind me, more importantly. Is that working, Guillaume?
Yeah.
Great. So what I was saying, in case you didn't hear it, is my name's Kshanti Kara, and welcome to the Tuesday evening class. I'll be leading this first part of the evening, and then I'll hand over to Danayutta a bit later. And for the last, this week and last, the Tuesday class has been a kind of hybrid class, if you like. So upstairs, in our two shrine rooms upstairs, there are, I think it's probably just shy of 30, maybe about 30 people, a bit more, perhaps a bit less, are here in person. And I spent about 2 years being on the Tuesday class at the London Buddhist Centre, so I'm really enjoying this kind of in-person online component. So this evening we'll meditate together in a minute, and then there'll be a presentation from Danayutta, and there's a flip chart which I'm excited by. Let's say I'm excited. Flip chart's exciting. And behind is Guillaume and Megan, who, do you want to come? Are you meant to come and wave? Come and wave at the camera. Don't know if they knew that was happening. Megan you'll have to lean down a little bit. Megan and
Hello.
Guillaume. And Danayutta, why don't you come and wave as well? But I'll introduce you properly later. This is Danayutta. Hello. Okay, so if you're just arriving, my name's Kshanti Kara, and what we're going to start by doing is we're just going to meditate together. So that's how we'll start. And in fact, I won't say very much about that at all. I'll lead us in this meditation. I've forgotten. I maybe meant to say, is anyone saying hello, Guillaume?
Yeah, there's lots of people here.
Come on, who's saying hello, Guillaume? Here we go.
Maitrejeet, I think, from India.
Maitrejeet from India, hello.
We've got Anne Charlet from Woodford Green.
Anne from
Nina
Woodford
Allen,
Green.
I think, from New York.
Nina from New York, yeah. Although I like Woodford Green as well. Sorry to Woodford Green, but New York's cool, isn't it?
Good. Paul, we've got lots of people saying hi.
We've got Paul, we've got lots of people showing lots of appreciation. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we start meditating in a second? So what you need to do is find a comfortable place to sit, and I'll guide us in only about a 15 meditation, just so we can arrive. It'll help me arrive too, and then I'll say a little bit more. And we're going to be here together until 8:30, with a very short break at some point. So if you're at home, well, I imagine you are, find a chair to sit on, or if you're sitting on the ground on some cushions or a stool, it's really important to have your hands supported. So I'm going to use a sort of scarf, and I'm going to tie that around my waist and put my hands in it. But behind me, or behind the camera where you can't see, is Megan and Guillaume, and they're getting some cushions together, so they might put a cushion on their lap and put their hands in that, or they might have a pile of cushions in front of them. But if you're just sitting on a chair, a desk chair or a dining room chair, just don't slouch in the chair, sit forward in the chair slightly, your feet flat on the ground, and you can rest your hands on your lap or on your thighs. Yeah? So just take a moment now to get what you need and make yourself comfortable. And I'll lead us in a short 15-minute meditation to begin. Okay, so when you've found a way to be comfortable, or at least comfortable enough, you can close your eyes. And with your eyes closed, you can allow yourself to sink into the ground, allowing the chair or cushion to take your weight. You can notice the contact and sense of pressure on your feet or legs touching the ground. We've got nothing to do for these next 15 minutes but sit here and come into contact with our body and mind. So you can really give your weight up to the earth. You can think of yourself like a mountain, heavy and sinking into the ground, while rising majestically into the sky. Giving yourself a few moments to settle into your posture. Now we can start to become aware of our face, the muscles of our face. All day long we use our face to express ourselves, but we don't need to do anything with our faces just now. Notice any holding on around your eyes or around your mouth. Are you clenching your jaw? Are you furrowing your brow? Smoothing out the muscles of your face. There's no need to hold your eyes tightly shut. Or to hold your mouth tightly together. Combing through the sensations and experience of our face, of our facial muscles, and doing what we can to soften them. And with our hands supported in our lap or on a cushion, we can really let go of the weight of our arms. We can allow our shoulder blades to fall down our back slightly. Opening up our chest a little bit. And noticing the widening gap between our ear and our shoulder, allowing more air to reach our neck. No need to hold on to our heavy arms. No need for tightness in our shoulder. Combing through our experience and softening any holding on, any tightness, or any tension. Notice also any holding on in your belly. Most of us have a tendency to hold our bellies in and upwards slightly. So once again, doing what you can to let that go. Allowing our bellies to fill naturally with air. Is there a sense of bracing in your legs, particularly in your thighs? Often we sit ready to jump up at a moment's notice. There's no need to go anywhere right now. Once again, give our weight to the ground. Putting down any sense of bracing in our thighs. Combing through our experience, softening our bodies, letting go of tension where we can. And by working with our experience of our body in this way, we'll probably notice our mind begin to settle too. What's the quality of your mind right now? Is it tight and tired? Or is there a sense of openness or energy? And just before we bring this short meditation to a close, once again taking a moment to notice the muscles of our face. Has the furrow in your brow returned? Are you once again clenching your jaw? With your hands supported. You let go of your shoulders a little bit more, widening that gap between your ear and your shoulder. What about your belly and your thighs? Combing through the experience of our body. bringing an awareness to our body, softening and settling down as best we can. Okay, good. So if you haven't already, opening your eyes and and do come out of your meditation posture if there's much difference to how you're sitting anyway. So if you joined us a little bit late, my name's Kshantikara and I'm sitting here in the London Buddhist Centre basement shrine room with the rest of the Tuesday class happening in person upstairs. So if you're in London, you could try and book for that next week. And what we were doing there is just arriving, just a short meditation, coming into contact with our body and softening tension where we can. A teacher here, Maitreya Bandhu, a friend of mine, uses this metaphor of combing through your body. He particularly talks about his experience of combing this kind of niece in his life, a bit more complicated than that, but let's say niece, and combing her hair and trying to get the kind of knots out and not pulling too hard, but not also being really soft, but kind of smoothing out the knots. And I like that metaphor for bringing an awareness to the body and soothing out and letting go of any knots. And then when you start again, at the top of your body, say again, you'll find some new knots or some more subtle knots, or just that the knots have returned. Yeah. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Danayutta, and I can see the beginnings of the notes of what she's going to talk about in front of me, and it's useful stuff, some Buddhist classics. And I won't say much about Danayutta other than I really like Danayutta. So I'm very pleased to be here with Danayutta this morning. And a lot of what I know about teaching meditation comes from Danayutta. Danayutta was definitely a mentor to me, weren't you? In the early days, in the pre-Kshantikara days, no less. So I'll hand over to Danayutta now.
Okay. Yeah, so a really, really warm welcome from me as well to the London Buddhist Centre. Very, very nice to have you here. Kshantikara is very helpfully bringing in a little flip chart of material. It's a very, very wonky...
It's going well.
It's a very wonky flipboard.
Can you see it on the camera?
Yeah, okay. I'm just gonna lift it over for a moment so that you don't get distracted by that. But yeah, that's interesting. Kshantikara saying that was a bit of a mentor. Actually, I think the more accurate thing is that we've got the same teachers. We're more like Vajra siblings in the tradition. Vajra means like adamantine, thunderbolt, and we're basically like we basically have the same teachers. So we're like Vajra brothers and Vajra sisters, brothers and sisters anyway. Yeah. So one of the things that I was asked to do today was to explore meditation, particularly in the area of positive emotion. And usually that's the meditation that we associate, usually that's the sort of quality that we associate with the meditation, the metta bhavana. And one of the things I've been thinking about recently, reflecting on, mainly in my meditation practice, is that doing what is good for you, or doing what is helpful, isn't the same as doing what feels nice, isn't the same as what feels pleasurable, and isn't the same as what we might sometimes think, on the surface at least, might make us happy. So sometimes that's the case, but very often, particularly in meditation, it might not be. If you're working with distraction or you're working with discomfort, that isn't what's going to be happening. Yeah. And I think it's also a very sort of it's sort of like slightly subversive. It's a slightly subversive teaching as well, because very often our contemporaries might tell us, our friends might tell us, that what we need to do is to do what makes us happy. But I don't think it's really that simple. Sometimes what makes us happy in the first instance might not actually be that growthful, that maturing. Sometimes we can find a lot of pleasure in doing things like moaning and complaining. It might not be what actually helps us. So I want to basically introduce two concepts. The first one is Vedana. And Vedana is what is the building blocks of our experience, the building blocks of our emotions. Vedana is, it's usually translated as hedonic tinge. It's a kind of very, very basic, bare experience. And Vedana is usually either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. So generally, what we need to do is to learn to stay with what is, but with awareness. Yeah. So we bear with what is with awareness, so that we're not hijacked by Vedana. Usually, if we've got too much unpleasant Vedana, we get ourselves into a bit of a bad mood. And usually, if we have too much neutral Vedana, we get a little bit bored. And if we have a lot of pleasant Vedana, and sometimes we can even have too much, a lot of pleasant Vedana, we get into like quite a happy mood, but usually what happens is that it quite quickly then tips into craving. So Vedana arises in relation to sense experience. So we might look upon something that is quite enjoyable. You might look at a really good-looking girl or guy. I'm looking at Guillen. He's quite good-looking, and that's like quite pleasurable. It's like that's enjoyable. You might like the smell of incense. I quite like the smell of incense, but these days I'm quite allergic. And again, like pleasant Vedana might arise, swiftly followed by unpleasant Vedana of like not being able to breathe. You might eat something that is nice, or and that pleasant Vedana will arise in relation to a nice tasting thing. Or you might have a bit of a. Today, actually, in my salad, I had a moldy tomato. So I was quite enjoying it until I saw the mold. So, you can have like a hedonic response to that as well. Anyway, so Vedana arises in relation to our senses. And in Buddhism, mind and thought is also a sense organ. So you tend to also get Vedana arising in relationship to thoughts, to trains of thoughts, and also to stories, narratives that we tell ourselves. By the way, I really do think that this teaching of Vedana, this concept of Vedana, is very, very important. So if there is anything that I'm saying that you don't quite understand, really please do put it into the chat box. There's no such thing as a silly question, and it's really, really important that we do sort of understand the concept of Vedana. The main thing to remember around Vedana is not to be hijacked by it. So, say if we've got too much unpleasant Vedana, say if you wear shoes that are too tight, if you wear your shoes that are too tight all day long, probably by the end of it you're going to be in a slightly bad mood, and then, I don't know, go home and like lash out at a partner. or a housemate, or just get quite easily irritated and triggered. So what we need to then do in that situation is just realize that our feet hurt, and that's why we're feeling a bit uncomfortable, or quite a lot uncomfortable, and we don't need to act on that discomfort and sort of spill over and affect other people by getting angry with them. Like I said earlier, you can also be hijacked by pleasant Vedana. If you ever like had a meal where there's a possibility of seconds, and you realize that, oh, this is actually a really, really good meal, and by the way, the portion's like slightly small, you might start eating faster, and you probably don't quite eat the first meal. And by the time that you've got a massive plate of seconds, and by the end of that second plate, you might not actually be feeling so good. And then that's you being hijacked by pleasant Vedana. Yeah, it's too much, and you've acted on it. It's just tipped into craving. Okay, so I hope that's clear. If it's not, do, like I say, ask some questions, and then we'll do a little bit of Q&A at the end of the session. I'll talk for a little bit more, and then we'll meditate, and we'll have a little break, and then the Q&A. So, going back to this thing about thoughts have Vedana, I was thinking, particularly in meditation, what you'll find is that thoughts have Vedana at different levels. So some thoughts are pleasant on the surface and pleasant at their depths. Some thoughts are sort of pleasant at their surface and actually unpleasant when you sort of investigate the thought. Some thoughts are unpleasant at the surface, and they're unpleasant at their depths, and some thoughts are unpleasant at the surface, but actually there's a kind of deeper satisfaction that is to be had. And this deeper level of satisfaction, this deeper level of pleasure, depends on whether or not these thoughts are kusala, are skillful or unskillful. So here's another little Buddhist word, little Buddhist concept for you, kusala. And usually this word kusala is translated as skillful or praiseworthy. The opposite of kusala is unskillful and blameworthy. And I think skillful and unskillful are probably quite good translations of kusala and akusala. And it's quite helpful, I guess, in our sort of like technologically minded world, the sort of our world that's sort of based on progress. We can sort of understand the concept of skillful. Skillful things like grow as they mature as. But praiseworthy and blameworthy, I think, are slightly more emotionally charged, more sort of complicated concepts, and maybe not such helpful translations in our modern world. But I thought I'd just sort of mention it because that's what is used in most of the translations of the sort of more ancient Buddhist texts. So if you look at the translations of the Pali Canon, the Digha Nikaya, the Majjhima Nikaya, you'll probably come across these words, praiseworthy and blameworthy, and what they refer to are kusala and akusala, skillful and unskillful. So, like I said, I think it's really important and helpful to think about kusala and akusala as whether or not actions, whether they're sort of thoughts, whether they're actions of speech, whether it's actions of body, like actual actions, or even just actions in our mind, whether these actions help us grow, help mature us, and whether it helps other people grow and helps other people mature. And you can probably tell by now that actions that are skillful, that are kusala, are deeply satisfying and pleasurable. On the surface, they may or may not be pleasant or unpleasant, but at a deep sort of like the inner sanctum of your heart level, they're very, very satisfying. So, kusala, I think, is a really helpful way to evaluate our experience, our responses, and our actions, like what we do with our life, what we do with our mind in meditation or out of meditation. It's looking at whether or not our actions, our speech is wise, is kind, is loving, it's growthful for ourselves and for other people. So I thought I'd just go through this little table. I mean, I kind of just like made this little table up. I'm sure like there'll probably be like some Buddhist texts that have this table somewhere. But as I was like thinking about this evening, I decided that a table's helpful, and you can sort of tell which bit I'm talking about. So something that's like pleasurable Vedana and skillful in meditation and out of meditation. I thought maybe like in meditation is like when you get really, really absorbed, when things are going really well in meditation, and when things are sort of deepening. Sometimes you can get into quite deep states of mind, and they're very, very pleasurable. And outside of meditation, I thought acts of generosity, whether you're generous in your speech or you're actually generous with your time or generous with your possessions, it's a very, very skillful thing to be generous. It's one of like the basic things of Buddhist ethics, is just to give. And often giving people stuff or giving people time or praising people, rejoicing in their qualities, they sort of bring a lot of pleasure for the giver as well. Yeah, so outside of meditation, that might be something that you've noticed. There are also like pleasurable states, pleasant states that are highly unskillful. So I've got on my notes, in meditation, watching Drag Race. So well, it's like rewatching the episodes in my mind. So I think I often talk about it in meditation because I think like actually as a concept, I think RuPaul's Drag Race is wonderful. It's very, very uplifting. I think it's a lot about empowerment, a lot about like working together, or a sense of cultivating a sense of self-worth. So I do think there's really something very, very positive. It's about transformation, basically. It's a show that's about transformation at many, many different levels, and I do think it's quite a good show. But rewatching RuPaul's Drag Race in my head, at the surface of it, it's actually quite enjoyable, but actually, when I dig deeper into the experience, it's not actually that pleasant. It's not actually that skillful. At least the act of rewatching it in my head over and over again. So outside of meditation, what can be pleasant and unskillful can be like, righteous indignation. I noticed that one of my most popular talks on YouTube is how to deal with difficult people, and righteous indignation came out quite a lot in that session. So, like when you know that you're really, really right and somebody else is really wrong, and then you like complain loudly about it to like anyone who would listen, that kind of state that you can get into, righteous indignation, often we really enjoy it because, we build up a sense of self. At the same time, it's a very unskillful, quite negative state of mind that we're then sort of like broadcasting to all our friends. So righteous indignation and complaining is often a very, very unskillful state that we can get into. So there are also states that are unpleasant but skillful. And I was thinking in meditation, maybe even that little meditation just there, if you were able to feel into any sort of like bodily tension, and to come close to it, to really, really approach it, to feel the unpleasant Vedana of the tension, that would be quite possibly unpleasant, but bringing awareness to the situation would have been a skillful act. Yeah, so that's a very, very simple thing that you can do in meditation. And then something that can be unpleasant but skillful could be, well, quite a simple thing. Like most people, I'm a yoga teacher, and most people find yoga like unpleasant but deeply satisfying, you know? Another thing that's maybe more in the arena of growth is admitting to faults, apologizing. So usually, I don't know if you're anything like me, admitting you're wrong is it's a bit unpleasant. You know, it's sort of like it attacks the ego, I guess. And it can, you know, you can sort of have a sense of positive shame, and that can be uncomfortable. But actually, this act of apology brings you back into connection with other people, particularly people that you might have been in conflict with. It brings you back into connection, back into dialogue, and is highly skillful. Yeah. And then lastly, you know, we can also get into states that are unpleasant and unskillful in meditation and outside of meditation. So I was thinking, I think my classic thing that I get into in meditation is like having arguments in my head with people. So it's unpleasant because like, you know, no one likes arguing. And also it's unskillful because I'm just usually like working myself up into a state and getting on my high horse. And it's also like it's really not going to go anywhere. Yeah. And then outside of meditation, I mean, I'm sure you can like fill in your own like unpleasant, unskillful. But just in case you don't have any ideas, one quite subtle one is feeling guilty. So, you know, I think like guilt is quite different from shame. Shame can often be quite positive, but guilt is often in relation to fear. Fear that somebody's affection might be withdrawn from us if they find out what we've done. So guilt is often, unpleasant and unhelpful. Okay. So just to like bring this all into meditation, the loving kindness practice, the metta bhavana practice that we do, and in general all practices, but the metta bhavana in particular, is a practice where we're deliberately, directly cultivating positive and skillful mental states. And it's also a practice that people can find pleasurable. You may find loving kindness practice pleasurable, you may not, but by and large most people do at some point anyway in their career of practicing meditation find metta bhavana enjoyable. And hopefully you can sort of see why the metta bhavana, cultivating loving kindness for yourself, a good friend, a neutral person, a difficult person, and all beings is skillful, but and there's sort of like also different levels to it. So I thought I'd just sort of pick out some points about each stage, which I think may be helpful just to sort of mention and to clarify. But and I was just thinking that I was thinking about maybe like what we're trying to overcome, what we're trying to sort of overcome the kind of like slight discomfort that we're trying to feel into in each particular stage, if you like. So in the first stage, where we're cultivating loving kindness for ourselves, I think for most people, what we're trying to overcome is a sense of low self-esteem or a sense of superficiality. It can be both, you know. I've definitely noticed that through doing the metta bhavana practice, I've transformed my sense of confidence. Probably when I first started meditating, I was sort of like outwardly quite confident, like even sometimes slightly aggressive. But it was a kind of brittle self-confidence, you know, self-confidence that like if it came up against something, it would smash, and then I had to like sort of put it together again. These days, I think the confidence that I have is a little bit more bouncy, it's a little bit more juicy, it's a more sort of like robust and resilient self-confidence. The other thing I think that we're also trying to overcome is a certain kind of superficiality. Because I think a lot of the language of self-love or self-care or self-kindness, being kind to ourselves, can actually be about making ourselves more attractive to other people. I think like particularly about self-care and wellness. Again, you know, like I teach yoga, and most people like do yoga because they want to look good in leggings, or have a nice bottom, or you know, whatever. But yeah, like often we associate self-care with actually just being more attractive to other people. That's why we like eat well, or you know, look after our skin. So then in the stage where we're bringing loving kindness to a friend, often what we need to overcome is a sense of self-interest. Usually, again, we know we like our friends because they agree with us, and they do what we ask them to do. They're sort of like, you know, subtle kind of alliances, really. But in the Metta Bhavana, what we're trying to do is to respond with loving kindness to them for their sake, and just, you know, without a sense of self-interest underpinning it or underlying it. So just a little bit quicker now, the neutral person stage, we're trying to overcome a sense of disinterest, so we sort of feel the disinterest. That is what we're working with. And then in the enemy stage, where we extend loving kindness to somebody who we don't like, what we're trying to do is to overcome hatred. And then in the final stage, where we extend loving kindness in an unlimited way to all beings, what we're trying to do is to overcome a concern with a limited number of people, sort of just to expand the boundaries of our loving kindness, expand the boundaries of our sphere of concern. Okay. So all these subtle sort of barriers that we need to overcome, we need to learn to really identify the sort of hedonic tinge, the Vedana, the texture of that experience. We need to sort of gather enough resources so that we can bear with the discomfort of those barriers, and to also just to work to overcome them, you know, by cultivating the opposite and the other ways that you work in meditation. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do about 25 more minutes of meditation. About 25 more minutes of meditation. And in the first stage, where we're going to be doing, we'll just do a very simple 5-stage Metta Bhavana practice, and I'll lead us through. So don't worry if you've not done the loving kindness practice before. I will guide us through it. But I thought particularly the first stage, the stage where we cultivate metta for ourselves, rather than using any phrases or any imagery, I'd like us to cultivate metta by going back to this meditation that Kshantikara just led us through, of combing through our experience, so very, very directly applying a response of care and attention, and working with our direct experience. So responding to ourselves with care, with attention. And we'll do this thing of just combing through the body. And then we'll extend loving kindness out to our friend. So pick a friend. Pick a friend that is quite a straightforward friendship. Pick a neutral person, so somebody who you don't particularly like or dislike. Pick somebody who's an enemy. That's quite a strong word. You may not have any enemies, but there might be somebody who you find difficult in your life, or are irritated by, or perhaps might be irritated with you. And then all beings. Okay, so if you just set up again for a meditation and for a fairly substantial sit, Thanks, Kia. So, seeing if you can just settle as much as possible. And taking your time to adjust your posture. The metta bhavana. So in the first stage, let's extend metta to ourselves by combing through our experience. And we can start with the face. You might want to just imagine brushing out your hair, combing out your hair. Imagine soothing out your scalp. Can you imagine smoothing out your cheekbones and your jaw? Brushing out the sides of your neck, down your arms towards your hands. See if you can imagine brushing down the back of your neck, your spine, and the sides of the spine, untangling any knots in your back, releasing any tension. You might want to continue combing downwards from your back, down your legs, towards your feet. Imagining brushing out the muscles in your legs, the long thigh bone and shin bones. And you might want to come back to the crown of your head. Brush down the whole body again. Perhaps moving to the front of the body, the chest, the belly, all the way down to the tips of your toes, soles of the feet. So however you are, however the different parts of your body are, you can bring your awareness to it and respond with kindness, with openness. Feel the Vedana. You might even spend a moment noticing the content of your distractions. And the underlying tinge of whether they're skillful, deeply nourishing, or unskillful. Again, with awareness, with kindness. Now let's move to the second stage and bring a good friend to mind. And see if you can notice whether even the thought of a good friend, your good friend, whether the thought of them brings pleasant Vedana. Can you extend loving kindness to them? Perhaps noticing any self-interest, where you like them for your own benefit. And see if you can just extend loving kindness to them because of them. Now, letting the good friend go, see if you can bring to mind a neutral person. And seeing if you can extend loving kindness to this neutral person. To be open, to be friendly, to care for their well-being. And looking out for disinterest when your mind starts to slide off. Now let's move on to the enemy, the difficult person. And see if you can notice what Vedana that arises in relation to the thought of the difficult person, the thought of the enemy. And particularly, if you notice tension in the body, you might just decide to relax that tension. Bring a skillful response. Now, holding the difficult person in mind, see if you can extend loving kindness towards them, to wish them well, to be open to them. You might find it helpful to reflect that the difficult person, they too have friends, people who love them and care for them just like you. They too have hopes and joys, as well as disappointments and sorrows. Now, let's start to open up the practice and cultivate metta equally between ourselves, good friend, neutral person, difficult person. And also bringing in more and more people. can we widen out our loving kindness towards all beings, anyone who comes into our experience, comes into our lives. Whether we know them or we don't. Perhaps wishing for all people, all beings, to be supported by what is kusala, what is skillful, what is deeply satisfying. Now start to draw the meditation to a close. However your meditation was, whether you were deeply concentrated or distracted, just see how you are now. So, what we're going to do now is just to have a little break. So maybe about 3 minutes, a chance to get some water, go to the loo, things like that. And then at the end of the little break, Kshantikara and I will be taking questions. So do let us know whether or not what I said about Vedana and Kusala resonated or not. Okay. I know.
There we go. I think we're back. Although, well, it's a minute behind, I think. I've got it live on my computer, but I'm talking to you from the future, from the past, something like that. So now's the chance to ask some questions. We've got about 10 minutes to do some questions together, Danayutta and I. And so do type some questions in and I'll do my best to get to them. So yeah, thank you very much for your talk, Danayutta. I've got some things that I was struck by, but I thought we could start with other people first, who are more important than I. So one question is from Stephen, who says, outside of meditation, is fantasies, and I like this bit, specifically sexual, considered unskillful? Outside of meditation, are fantasies specifically sexual considered unskillful? And I like the thanks at the end.
Huh.
What do you think?
I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I was... well, one thing that I was thinking, particularly for Stephen, but for anyone, is... I don't know, I can understand the desire for Danayutta and I to tell you the answer. And it never quite works like that, I think. And I think that's one of the advantages of getting to know other people that are practicing meditation and Buddhism is you can talk through what your mind is doing and they'll help you unpick whether it's skillful or not. So I want to be quite careful of saying, oh, fantasies are bad, or particularly when it comes to the sexual arena, sexual fantasies are bad, because that would be too easy. And also like, sort of, I don't know, stereotypically religious to say, yes, they're awful, pack it in. And I think you sort of have to use your wits, don't you? And notice what certain fantasies are doing to you. So you could have fantasies about really beautiful things, couldn't you, or really skillful things, like fantasizing about climbing up the realms of existence to meet the enlightened mind or something. That would be like quite a nice thing to do with your mind. But you could also fantasize about food and chocolate, and it's probably unskillful, maybe not massively so, but there's probably better things to do with your mind. It's sort of a sliding scale, isn't it? Which I think comes into the sort of sexual fantasy arena as well. It's sort of a sliding scale. It depends on the content.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really, really interesting thing. I think one of the things that you're picking out is the difference between fantasy and imagination. You know, talking about like, you know, like we obviously in meditation we do use an element of imagination, sort of like imagining, bringing people to mind. That is imagination, and I would say it's sort of like fantasy is a kind of like close cousin of imagination. I think the difference between fantasy and imagination is a kind of like aesthetic quality. You know, I think like a lot of like sort of like true imagination is very, very uplifting, and fantasy, whether they're sexual or not, you know, I was thinking like I probably don't have so much like sexual fantasies. I probably have like more like revenge fantasies.
Right. I'd say I'm the opposite.
But I would say like revenge fantasies are probably like even worse.
Right.
They're even worse than sexual fantasies.
Okay,
you know, like,
I'm doing all right.
because like craving, it means you're still into the other person. Like revenge, you're definitely like not into the other person. So
That's sort of there's a thread in the Buddhist tradition there about it's worse to be hateful because it negates somebody else than to crave something. Craving and hate are both not good.
Yeah, they're both not good.
But hate is worse.
But hate is worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think ultimately all fantasy is speculative and unhelpful and distracting, and also really, really understandable, really, really human. Really human, and not something to be scared of. Basically, I think if you're fearful of them, it puts you off even more working with them.
And I guess like with anything, it's interesting. You can to get in touch with what it is that's driving it. And,
that's right.
Particularly, I find in meditation, if you can really get into what it is that's driving it, like you're bored or you want pleasure or something, then you know what to look for in the meditation. You need to make it more exciting, or you need to look for subtle, pleasant sensations or something. So you can sort of look behind the fantasy rather than trying to just destroy it.
Yeah.
Should we do
Next question?
Another question. So Mercia, I think is the name, is asking about the need to be continuously watchful in both meditation and outside, labelling Vedana or thought as skillful and unskillful. So this idea of being aware all the time, constantly watchful. Is that the right assumption? Is she making the right assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's interesting. One of the translations, well, there's several sort of like Buddhist words that are translated as mindfulness, and one of them has a more direct translation of vigilance. So I think that is an element of mindfulness. An element of mindfulness basically is vigilance. I'm not quite sure about the question whether or not there's a slight mix-up between Vedana being skillful or unskillful, because I think like Vedana is neither skillful or unskillful. Vedana is pleasurable or unpleasurable. It's our response to Vedana that is skillful or unskillful. So the moment that you're having your experience, or whatever experience it is, like Vedana is more like the texture of your life, the texture of your experience, and in that moment it's just a response. It's just sort of like what's arisen in that moment as a response to something previous, and then what we do with that is whether it's skillful or unskillful. So it's a bit like if you notice you're fantasizing and then you decide to continue your revenge fantasy or your sexual fantasy, that is probably the moment where you decide, that tips it into like skillful or unskillful.
It's definitely tipping it into something you're deciding to do.
Exactly.
Just then the volition, you're pushing it in a direction.
But yeah, pain or pleasure is not in itself skillful or unskillful.
I was just asking, before I say something, Oliver, to just say a little bit more about your question, maybe with an example or something. So that's for Oliver. But on this topic, there's this phrase, isn't there, from Sangharakshita, who found this tradition about awareness being revolutionary, and that's kind of in this area, is it, that to be aware of what's going on, what our minds are doing, where it's going, what we're being driven by. That's the kind of area, isn't it, of what would that be like to be aware of what's going on sort of all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, but this thing of like dividing your thoughts into two heaps is a very, very traditional practice. So I think you can even look it up. The Buddha talking about dividing his thoughts into two heaps. Like one heap is what's helpful and kusala and growthful, and another heap is like what's not. And he just decides to abandon the thoughts that are not helpful and not growthful, and just to cultivate the thoughts that are helpful and growthful. So that's really what we're aiming to do. We bring awareness to it so that we can stop doing the things that prevent us from growing, stop thinking those trains of thoughts that prevent us from growing, and to really cultivate the thoughts that really help us mature, be wiser, be kinder, be more like more enlightened, basically.
Yeah, very good question. So the question from Oliver, although more info hasn't come through yet, but I think it does make sense now I've read it again. So can things elicit different Vedana at the same time? So I guess what Oliver means is, can something be pleasant and painful at the same time? Actually, it makes perfect sense, so I read it out. Sorry, Oliver.
Yeah.
So can things be painful and pleasant at the same time?
Yeah, totally. They can totally be pleasant and painful at the same time. Like a lot of like what I teach in yoga around Vedana is like things being pleasant and painful at the same time. You can do it like you feel into a posture where it's like really stretching like your hip or something. And it's like,
as you get people making that noise like it's kind of kind of nice,
but kind of nice.
Yeah.
It's like sort of like horrible but sort of nice. And maybe it's just that it registers at different levels.
And then I guess part of Oliver's question as well, and he's saying a bit more now, is then of course also they can be really different as well. Like you could just have Vedana that's rather like taking up a lot of your awareness and it's very, very painful, or taking up a lot of your awareness and it's very, very pleasant.
Exactly. But actually there's a lot more texture. Actually, I might just say that like my experience of working with Vedana is that it changes over time, and often when you go into it, you actually get an experience of impermanence. So particularly like going into it in meditation. So, I mean, outside of meditation, you know that Vedana changes over time. So like, you probably didn't, if you're a smoker, you probably didn't enjoy your first drag of cigarettes. Like, you never really enjoy your first beer or your first olive, or, there's lots of like things that, the Vedana of it changes over time. But even in a very, very small scale of like one meditation practice, if you're staying with like a painful knee or a painful shoulder, as you stay with the sensations, you'll start to notice that they change. For me, more often than not, they sort of like start to fade into neutral, actually. Not always, sometimes like my knee is painful at the start, at the middle, and at the end.
Okay, yes, it's not a promise.
It's not a promise. It's not a promise. And you can definitely not bargain with it. If you think like, I'm just going to stay with you, painful shoulder, so that you go away, it will almost definitely not work. So you can't bargain with it.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you speak, because I think kind of, pulls out something of how to practice in all of this is noticing your experience, learning what goes well, and then repeating that. I was thinking while you were giving your talk that it all sort of makes sense, and I sort of believe that it would be true, but then you've also kind of got to give it a go, and like you've got some good examples of, okay, so now I know when that happens, I work with it like this. I don't know, I'm more a reflection than a question, just that sort of interesting idea of faith, and you kind of got to have faith, haven't you? Particularly when you're working with things that are pleasant but unskillful, you got to have faith that the pleasantness isn't worth it, but the skillfulness is. But that part of that faith comes from practicing with it and noticing where it gets you, and then remembering later on.
Yeah. Yeah, I might actually just go back to my drag race example because I definitely had a very, very strong experience of that. So basically what I did was I spent a whole weekend watching Drag Race because I didn't have a Netflix account, and suddenly I was somewhere where I had
With
a
a
Netflix
Netflix
account. Spent the whole weekend
Paradise.
watching like a whole season of like Drag Race in 2 days basically. So basically I was like rewatching it in my head on Monday morning, and I was really enjoying it on the surface of it. It was really, really, I mean, that's why you do it, right? That's why you have fantasies or, where you rewatch things because it's enjoyable. So I had this, it was the season where Evie Oddly won Drag Race, and I was watching it in my head. And then I sort of thought, okay, I'm doing this. And I somehow had enough awareness to realize that the experience of watching Drag Race was like, my heart was pounding, and basically I just felt like I was on like a really bad trip. And then I thought, all I need to do is just like take all the energy that was going into rewatching Drag Race into the breath. And suddenly I just fell out of Drag Race and into my body and onto the breath. And yeah, like my experience completely transformed, and it was so much more enjoyable, satisfactory, nourishing, refreshing. It's like I just like took all that energy and shifted it, to something that was going to satisfy.
It's a really good example. That's a really good example.
Yeah.
I think let's start wrapping it up there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Danayutta. So Danayutta and I are here on a Tuesday evening, giving our time freely to you over the internet. Guillaume and Megan are behind the camera, behind the camera. We're in front of it. And we're all doing so voluntarily. So I encourage you to voluntarily give us some money. There's like all different. I'm sure I've meant to have done some training about how to ask for money. Anyway, basically, we're all here volunteering our time. You've really enjoyed the last hour and a half, and it's made a big difference to your week. It's probably even started to change the course of your life. Anyway, I was mocking it, but maybe it has. So why don't you make a donation, and Guillaume will put a link in the chat so you can make a donation to the London Buddhist Centre. Yeah.
And just remember, generosity is skillful and pleasurable.
Skillful and pleasurable.
Yeah.
And really important. The London Buddhist Centre is really, like everywhere, adapting to the situation we're in. Any help you can give would be really great. And I'd really encourage you to keep coming along on Tuesday evenings. What I really like about the way that we've structured the Tuesday evenings now is we've got the same team of teachers. There's about 5, soon to be 6, I think. And we're going to be teaching upstairs in person and downstairs on YouTube and moving around them. So Tuesday night is a bit like a class you can join in online, in person. You'll bump into the same people. I'd really encourage you to come next week because Subhuti is visiting. So Subhuti is the president of the London Buddhist Centre and, a remarkable man, a very serious Buddhist practitioner. He led the project to build the London Buddhist Centre just over 40 years ago. And one of the kind of guiding lights, I don't quite want to say, I'll say stars of the order that Danayutta and I are part of. And Subhuti's visiting us, albeit online, next week. And each evening he'll be being interviewed by somebody. I think next week on Tuesday it's Pranyamanis, but on other evenings Danayutta and I are interviewing him as well.
Yeah, on Monday.
You're Monday and I'm doing Wednesday. So why don't you come Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. See Subhuti being interviewed. It would be really, really worth you coming. And I believe he's doing something in the morning as well, a morning meditation. So go to the London Buddhist Centre website and really join in with Subhuti's visit next week. I think that's everything I need to say. So goodbye.
Yeah, thank you very much and goodbye.